Hi Andy, hi Roger.
Hey, all right.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Just
All right.
just very
I'm
quiet.
using
I
a
noticed
different
there's a number of
system
other
today.
vegan lives tonight, so it might be particularly quiet.
So am I okay as well?
Yeah, you're fine, you're fine. Roger, did you re-listen to the narration of In Search of Veganism before this show? I didn't realise until earlier when I was re-listening to it just how bad the dog snoring is on that narration. I'm gonna have to re-record that. It's like the whole way through, all you can hear in the background is I obviously don't listen to them back very often in headphones, and it's really like clear.
That's probably quite a good sound effect, though, Andy.
It's
The dog
actually quite
snoring in the
relaxing.
background.
In fairness, yeah, it's actually quite like ASMR-y, but it's only on the first part. On the second part, it's not there. I'm just on part one, and then I obviously re-recorded the entire thing when I did them combined, so that one's fine. It's just literally part one. Yeah, the dog snoring is really bad. So apologies for that. I didn't notice, and it's been up like 9 months. But yeah, so I suppose we're carrying on from what 1949. I think we got to.
Yeah, I'm just trying to rearrange my audio here.
Because I noticed there's a couple of interesting things about this part one, for different various reasons that we'll sort of get to. But I think one of them is pretty telling when it comes to the actual coining of the word.
So what we've got then, folks, this is pretty exciting in terms of the history of the vegan social movement, in the sense that this is kind of just before they really got down to work out the philosophy. So even though we're in 1949 and there's two essays called In Search of Veganism, they're still kind of just like laying the ground. In fact, it starts with Cross saying clearing the ground. So
Yeah,
it's kind of like, well, we need a definition now. We haven't had one for 5 years, but there's still stuff to do before we go on to that. So they were very kind of methodical, really.
yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a great time to reiterate yet again that if this was literally just about abstaining from eating animal products and it was essentially just a diet with a few extra things, then there was no need to assemble a definition. There was no need to put forward a philosophy. There was no need to even have this conversation. What they were doing was enough, but it wasn't because that was never the idea. And I think it's also really telling that if anyone goes onto like issue.com, for example, and looks at the Vegan Society stack, if you go onto the initial decade where it's like the 1940s to 1950, you can see on the front covers for yourself that up until you've got up until winter 47 where it's the original just a colored cover with nothing else, and then there's just one edition, the Vegan Spring 1948, which has got like a subheader of advocating health without dairy produce. And that only lasts one issue before it's changed then to advocating living without exploitation, which is a pretty serious step forward.
It's interesting that says without exploitation.
Yes.
It doesn't limit it to just the exploitation of other animals. It's exploitation full stop. So
And that's as early as the summer 48. So that's
yeah,
before this.
and you see, if the people who were involved in the founding of the Vegan Society objected to that, then that wouldn't have been on there, would it? It would
No,
have.
of course not.
You see, so that's an indication that veganism is actually against all exploitation.
Exactly that. And I mean, just again to reiterate,
Yeah.
if the Spring 48, i.e., vegan advocating health without dairy produce, if that was the aim, there'd no need to change it. They were already doing that. They already knew it was abstaining from eating animal products or whatever, and that was enough. But it wasn't in their minds, and so they had to, bring in the rest. Yes. And that's exactly what Cross is talking about here. We realised that we didn't have a philosophy. Well, you didn't need one if you were a diet.
Yeah, absolutely. And that would have, that was before, quite some years before Leslie Cross actually came up with a definition.
Yeah.
That living without exploitation was, was in the, on the cover of their magazine, wasn't it? That must have been approved by all the people that
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
founded the movement.
Another thing he does in Search of Freedom, in Search of Veganism, number 2, is he actually explains what he means by exploitation. He says the act of using for selfish purposes. So, I mean, you could even read that as anti-capitalism.
Yeah, you could, absolutely, yeah. But yeah, that starts in summer 48 and it goes all the way to the spring of 51 before they drop the subheader completely, and it's just got kind of like the two lines underneath, and that's what they have then for, well, about another 15 years.
Yeah. This is actually quite a fascinating document for historians of the movement, in the sense that, and there's a very modern thing to start off with. He says that when we say veganism is this or that, what we're really saying is my idea of veganism is this or that. Now, the real weird thing about that is that we're back to that now.
Absolutely, yeah. That was a point that I wanted to bring up. I mean, at the time that he's writing this, he's speaking factually because they don't have a definition, and so it is everybody's interpretation. Whereas obviously we do have that now, and people choose to either ignore it or refuse to take the one that's already considered, or they dilute it for their own reasons or whatever. So we have that now. Most of our job half the time is explaining to people what veganism actually is.
Yeah, but my question to you two is this the fault of the Vegan Society when they came up with the 79 to 88 definition, which everybody adheres to now? It almost like moderates what went before.
Yes and no. Yes and no. So obviously, yes, it's a kind of backward step, I suppose, in terms of language, the current one. But at the same time, the Vegan Society aren't responsible for people saying it wrong or diluting it any further or all of those things. I mean, think of how many, we've talked about it in the past, think of how many people revert the words cruelty and exploitation so that they say cruelty first.
Yeah.
Well, that's not the Vegan Society's fault, is it? Like, that's people.
So, like,
yeah, I think it's a bit of both.
What was the definition, the Vegan Society's definition, prior to this one, prior to the current one? What did that say?
Well, it went through various kind of mutations, really, and then what we're finding with the history is that Cross kind of had to come up with a short form definition, and so that definition is focused on what I call the focus of veganism. But he immediately says that to look at it in its fullness, you've got to look kind of a bit wider than that. And so you've got the kind of Donald Watson thing from 45, which is about the objective of the Vegan Society is to oppose the exploitation of sentient life, and then you've also got the kind of potentially anti-capitalist kind of rider to that, which is whether it is profitable to do so or not, which is quite a fascinating kind of thing. Although, Andy, I think that might be the context of the answer, because they were talking about bees, weren't they, at the time?
Yeah.
So I think the question might have been, well, what's wrong with using bees because we can make money out of them? I think it might have been something like that. But then you've got various different ones.
Well, in the letter, the guy that's wrote to the vegan, he's saying you can extract honey without harming the bee. If you're against harm, what's the problem? So that's when he explains that actually it's against the exploitation of.
Yeah, but it doesn't still answer about the profit thing, does it?
No.
So that's.
I suppose I think. No, actually it doesn't, because there isn't actually any mention of money in the original letter, because that's printed above it, and it does literally talk about, well, if there's no harm that could be caused in this, so what's the problem? So yeah, I'm not actually sure why the profit bit is on there.
Yeah, that's quite an interesting one. Cross is saying in Search of Veganism of 1 that it's kind of okay that they haven't got a definition so far. This is 1949, and the society was kind of founded in 44 and kind of constitutionally founded in 47. But he's saying it's okay that we've taken our time over it. In fact, that's a good thing, he said, which is quite interesting. He said, but then now we've got to buckle down and get ourselves sorted out. Because now is the time that we can't go on kind of just waffling about it type of thing. And then in the because I didn't actually listen to your narration, Andy. I looked at the actual essays, and if people
Yeah.
want to do that, they can go to a candidhominid.com to look at that. And so all of them are there on a candidhominid.com. And then he said this in the third or fourth paragraph. It's really interesting. He says, the way in which our movement may be provided with an agreed definition is, of course, by majority consent. So he's talking about the kind of mechanics of how a definition will come about. And then he says, and by the inclusion of that consent in the form of a short definition. And so this is the thing that a lot of modern day vegans have been very unfair about.
Yeah.
Because they've essentially taken this short definition and just using that as the definition.
Mm-hmm.
And yet Cross warns against doing that all the time.
Yeah, he also, which is really interesting, the fact that he talks about by majority consent, right? So although the accusation quite often is that Cross came in and kind of like took over, and that's obviously not the case, because these people that he apparently took over from are the consent that he's talking about.
Well, that's interesting, really. The thing that I wanted to say after that is that because what he does in this essay is he says, okay, well, we need to move forward, but before we do that, we have to review what we've done already, right? And so what he does in kind of academic terms, in the next 3 paragraphs, he kind of gives a literature review of what's been said about, in the kind of area of a philosophical definition thus far. So if you don't mind, I thought it'd be quite good to actually read through those.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that okay with everybody?
Yeah.
Absolutely, yes.
And then we can bring up points. So if you think of a point, just interrupt me, right?
Yeah,
so
there's definitely one in the middle paragraph. So yeah, absolutely.
Well, there's one in the first one when he talks about Donald Watson. So he says,
you're starting from in July 1943.
Yeah, in July.
That paragraph.
Yeah. There appeared in the Vegetarian Messenger, where all this big debate about non-dairy vegetarians started, a letter about the use of dairy products by vegetarians. Correspondence on the subject was maintained for something over 12 months, after which there appeared in the same journal a request, this is really funny, signed by Donald Watson of Leicester.
Yeah.
It's kind of quite funny. Signed by a Donald Watson of the Shire of Leicester, asking vegetarians interested in living without dairy products to write to him. And he received 50 replies. Now, Andy, you've made a lot about the fact that Watson has kind of praised Cross for his contribution. Now, this is really quite interesting because Cross is being quite modest here, because that first correspondence was by him, but he doesn't mention himself.
Doesn't he mention himself? No, absolutely. Also, is what's I thought interesting in that first kind of couple of words, which is in July 1943. So going back to our previous shows where we weren't sure just how long this correspondence started, well, there's best part of 12 months at least before the November of 44 when this was decided. So yeah, that's how long it took for these letters to go back and forth and for these conversations.
And still during the war, of course, as well. I mean, we talk about the war years here as well.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And it received 50 replies, so each one of those then has got to be replied to. It's not like there's a group chat on WhatsApp and it's reply all, each one's got to be responded to, each person's got to be taken into consideration, all those different things. Yeah, there's so much to think about.
Yeah, Watson did say in one interview that when he was as kind of secretary, he would get up to 70 letters a day or something, I think he said.
Yes.
And he said that when he came back from working as a teacher, he would start answering the questions.
I think it's in the same conversation. He says that it became a full-time job, essentially, replying to letters.
Yeah, and he said he would never go to bed until all of them were done.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
dedication for a foodie, huh?
Yeah, that's quite good, isn't it? Yeah. So he goes on. In subsequent negotiations, the Vegetarian Society declined to agree to the formation of a dairy group within its ranks. So we know that kind of story, that they said no, which ended up being a good thing. And itself suggested that the group might be formed outside the Vegetarian Society. So that was a really good thing.
Mhm.
This small group of persons, brought together by Mr. Watson, thus became the embryonic organization which eventually became known as the Vegan Society. In November 44, there appeared the first edition of the Vegan News. The organization had a few dozen members, and the word vegan had not been adopted by Mr. Watson as one. Had just been adopted by Mr. Watson as one suggestion for the name of the new group.
Well, I think that's key as well, because it's not saying that Donald coined the word as many people do. It's actually agreeing with the suggestion that it was coined by Dorothy and Elsie, and he's just agreed to the suggestion.
Well, he does claim in the archive, Donald Watson archive, that it was him and Dorothy that came up with it.
Yeah, but there's also that contrary thing.
Yeah,
I think it was Minehead or something on a holiday that it was talked about. So yeah, it's funny. You don't actually know the truth behind that one.
Yeah, and then Watson says this that a lot of people have said. As a matter of passing interest, other suggestions include dairy ban, all vegan, vetan, benivore, belly door, and some complicated titles like the Total Vegetarian Group. Now, can you imagine how bad it would be if the Vegan Society was called the Total Vegetarian Group?
The Total Vegetarian Group, yeah. Or dairy ban. How hard it would be to get away from like food.
Yeah, that's right. And so the point is, it really is interesting.
Voice always makes me sound like a cereal.
a serial killer. It goes to show really that the fact that there was a lot of focus on food at the time.
Yes.
And then the philosophy that is really, it takes another 10 years for the philosophy to really develop. That's what kind of blossoms. You know, it's like it grows out of this seed of these non-dairy vegetarians. It's really kind of fascinating.
Yeah, and it also shows that they are both learning and exploring this as time goes on, as well as all this is being shaped. I mean, as you've mentioned a few times, these people probably had absolutely no idea when they first agreed to set up the Vegan Society, just how big a task that they were actually taking on, just how big a movement that they were actually starting.
No, I agree with that. And then Watson says in a bracket something, quite quirky. He said, we should indeed feel relieved at the final choice. In other words, vegan,
correct,
right, compared with all the other ones. And then the final chapter, final paragraph. And this is really interesting now, because this is the kind of lit review, the literature review. The editorial of the first Vegan News stated, we can see plainly that our present civilization is built upon the exploitation of animals, just as past civilizations were built on the exploitation of slaves. And then this is a bracket from Cross. This is was an early hint that the non-varied vegetarians were destined to be no more than one part of the general philosophy of a new movement. And so that was the first hint that things were going to, blossom from there. He then goes, the third issue, May 1945, stated that veganism was the practice of living upon fruits, nuts, vegetables, grains, and other wholesome non-animal foods. And there's another bracket from Cross, which would perhaps be more accurate to have said, not that veganism is, but that it involves living on such foods. So he comes on to that because that's a practice. He doesn't like that in the end, right? And then the final thing he says, the fourth edition, August 1945, the one that we're forever quoting, is stated the object of the Vegan Society is to oppose the exploitation of sentient life, whether it is profitable to do so or not. Then there's the final bracket from Cross, and he said this is a considerable widening of the original non-dairy motivation. So there's almost like you can see the evolution within, say, about 18 months of these ideas. It's getting bigger and bigger all the time.
Yeah. And
then we've got the constitutional formation of the Vegan Society, which is 1947. Is everybody still there? I can hear.
Yeah, you were just listening.
Yeah. Okay, let's see what else I got written down, just to bring up. And so he then starts to say, okay, so let's move towards a definition, and what should it be in general terms? And he says, what we need is to formulate a principle. That veganism is a principle and not a set of practices or aims even. Now, the aims one is a bit more confusing to me, but the practices I can see. So he says, we need a principle, just like the anti-slavery people had a principle. And of course, it ends up being liberation or emancipation or non-exploitation. These are what they settle on. He said, so it's not like a checklist of things that we don't do or anything, a set of practices that we do. It's the principle that guides those things. Right. So that's what he's saying. And that really brings us to the end of In Search of Veganism number 1.
Yeah.
So speak to me, people. I've gone on for too long.
No, I mean, I think just before, so I've just posted the entire narration of these 2 essays, In Search of Veganism Part 1 and 2 combined, before I went live. So if anyone wants to sort of listen to them throughout, then obviously they're there. Or as Roger said, they're all on Candid Hominid or on my website if you want to read them. And I highly, highly, highly recommend that you do. Literally all of this stuff, it's going to take you about an hour and a half of your life to read through these essays, and kind of you'll see this shape for yourself. So you don't need to rely on someone else kind of quote mining a sentence from here, because it's all there and you can see how this evolves and sort of transpires in real time, so to speak, because it's there. It's all there in the writing.
Indeed. And so when we get to In Search of Veganism 2, and this is autumn of 1949. Funny, really, because in the Candid Hominid, it says the fall.
Yeah, fall. Yeah.
Yeah, very North American, that, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Another good thing about that is if you go to that website, you can click on the link which takes you to the actual original Vegan Society magazine, and it's also available as a PDF. So it's quite a really kind of detailed and interesting site, this, for people who are interested in the history of the movement.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, especially as you say, if you click on where it says pages 15 to 17, for example, it will take you directly to the vegan issue on issue.com, and those pages will be open, so you can read the entire thing for yourself.
Yeah. So then number 2 then really is almost like a continuation, really, of thoughts leading up to the beginning of the definition. So it's fascinating, really, that they took virtually, 3 or 4 months just to talk about the lead up to getting a definition sorted out, rather than, I mean, again, it goes back to the point that we made, isn't it, about how it's kind of grindingly slow from our point of view.
Yeah, of course. I mean, as he mentioned, so all of this is done by consent or democracy, so to speak. So if you've got 30 members, just for argument's sake, and I actually think they had more than that at this time, then all of those people have got to vote or agree before this gets done. So how are you doing that in 1947? Well, you're sending a letter to everybody, and you're not photocopying it. So you've got to type that letter 30 times or 40 times or 50 times and then send it. And then if one person doesn't get the letter, they have to be resent it again to make sure that they can have their vote. Like, it's so complicated when you think about it.
Yeah, it's much easier
It's so
nowadays.
easy for us now, if we were doing this, to just organise everything, put it on a Google Drive or some sort of chat where we're all connected instantly. But these people were relying on the postal service, and then they'd have to wait for that to be read and responded to before they could do anything.
Well, it's an interesting point, that, though, isn't it? Because if you were to listen to modern day activists, they never kind of acknowledge the fact that they've got it piss easy compared with the past.
Absolutely. Can you imagine just in 2024 if there was no internet, for example, and we were all communicating just by letter? I mean, obviously the postal service is much better now than it was then, and there's no war complications or any of those things, and yet it would still be extremely slow and extremely difficult. And you'd have to make sure, just as they did with the letters that were written in, everything you said was concise and to the point, because you ain't going to get another chance. It's not like you can go, I forgot to say that, I'll send another message.
Yeah, edit. The thing is, mind you,
so that's what everything would have had to be well thought out and well organised. Yeah.
Well, it was interesting though that they used to have 2 and sometimes 3 posts a day, though, didn't they, as well?
Yeah.
You got that thing where you can send a letter, get the reply, and then they get your reply all in the same day. which
Yeah,
is pretty.
that is also very true. I don't know how sort of like efficient that was during the war.
No, I mean, but it's pretty good going, isn't it? When you're thinking,
Oh, absolutely, yeah,
yeah, you're doing all that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when we got 2 posts a day. There was
Was it like a morning and an afternoon?
There was one early in the morning, and there was one around about midday as well. And the midday post tended a lot of that used to be kind of sort of bump type mail.
Right.
The kind of what's called junk mail used to always come in like the second post, and the important letters and that were like the ones.
And that was carrier pigeon, wasn't it, Ronnie? That's not very vegan.
Yeah, back for me it was, yeah. Smoke signals and all that it was, but yeah. So I think the postal service has actually declined from what it was maybe 20 years ago, perhaps even 30 years ago. It's declined. It's got worse. Well, here in the UK, obviously where I am, but what it was like way back in the sort of late 1940s and the 50s, I really don't know how that compares with today.
No, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Really.
But yeah, I mean, and it is important though that like all these people would have had a say, and all these people would have had to come to some sort of agreement, and so all of that's got to be waited for. I mean, I'm sure they would have had like an AGM and that sort of things at times, but they probably only happen like yearly, and I can't imagine everybody showed up. So like, yeah.
Well, Cross talks about AGMs and also special meetings. Like what is it called? Extraordinary EGM, isn't it? So yeah, they've got AGM and EGM, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't see why they just didn't organise a Zoom talk.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, come on.
I mean, talk about not using the technology that wasn't there for 50 years.
But I think it's just really important for us to kind of think that we have no idea how this would have kind of transpired, because we've never lived in that world for the most part. Everything's kind of instant for us now. We get instant responses or instant acknowledgement or any of those kind of things. We can.
Yeah, there's a downside to that, isn't there, though?
Well, also, in terms of the sharing of knowledge as well, that would have been a problem, right? If you'd have learnt something, the only way that you could let someone else see it is to like post them the book or lend them the book. Scan the pages in, or
how many times, Ronnie, have you seen something like, say, a letter in the press, and you think, I'm going to answer that, right? And then it takes you 2 days to do it, and by the time you've gone the 2 days, you've kind of come up with a better answer than the first one that you came up with.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I do a lot of letter writing to the newspapers, and kind of basically, I think kind of at the beginning, I put a lot of thought into composing letters, but now I don't have to worry so much because I kind of use those earlier letters as a kind of template.
Yeah.
If you see what I mean. So
yeah.
It becomes easier if you can do that. But I think in the first place, yes. I mean, you kind of I mean, of course, now letters to newspapers, and I'm really talking about my local newspaper. You can send them by email. So although the letter appears in the newspaper as a printed letter, you can actually send the letters in by email, so it's a lot easier to send them into the newspapers these days. But obviously, in composing a letter, you do put a lot more thought into that than you would be just commenting on social media.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, you make sure that your points are concise and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, you only get one chance.
Yeah, Andy, Cross talks about the manifesto on veganism. Do you know what he's talking about there? Is that this is just the conglomeration of Watson's writing, do you think?
I think so, because it's something that I've looked for before, and I don't think it actually exists.
No, but he does use little kind of snippets from what he calls the manifesto.
Yes, it may well have been something that was handed out and never printed.
Yeah, I mean, there's a very modern kind of thing where Watson says at one point, the time has come for us to boldly renounce the idea that we have the right to exploit animals. And of course, I mean, like the theory of animal rights was still 40 years away.
Yeah.
So that's pretty interesting. The fact, and then Cross uses the word rights as well, although he uses it in a kind of legal sense. Giving rights rather than recognizing them.
Yeah.
Whereas Watson is a little bit more moral rights, really. which is quite interesting.
Yeah, which again kind of counters that claim that he was just interested in food and he was radicalized and all these kind of things.
Yeah, well, that was my kind of speculation, wasn't it? Really, from last time, yeah. But they eventually go on to kind of say that when all this gets sorted out, we're going to recognize that what veganism is, and this is a mile away now from dairy vegetarians. What veganism is at heart is a massive world. He called it a major world reform, right? He even called it a shining star of that. You know that they were a little bit kind of liable to this kind of bombastic language sometimes, you know, and it was kind of like, this is the best thing since sliced bread type of thing. But that's what they actually felt about veganism as an idea. And it's such an irony that they were just asking for a non-dairy section of the Vegetarian Society, and then it kind of, blossomed into this incredible philosophy about justice and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. But no, I actually quite like that light thing, because I mean that is pretty much what it is. You could consider this kind of like it's darkness that they're trying to shine a light on. It's darkness that they're trying to sort of like open people to see. So I understand that kind of like.
Yeah, Watson talked about the Titanic, didn't he? Use that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, he used that kind of weird metaphor. He said, well, other movements, which he called lesser movements, and I've always worried about that. He calls other causes, as they call it in those days.
I don't think he means lesser as in they're not important. I think he means lesser as in they've never considered the broader aspect of what.
Yeah, it's lesser as in scope. That's what he means.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I don't think he means rubbish.
Yeah. I think that's important to point out. It's not meaning like they're not important or that they're not doing a good job. It's more that they're lesser in the fact that they are focused on this particular thing, this particular cause, this particular issue, and they don't realise that actually all of these things are related.
Yeah, well, in terms of my PhD, he's basically saying we are the first movement to extend these ideas over the species barrier.
Yes.
Because what Cross says that at one point is the fact that we've had this barrier in terms of talking about rights or talking about freedom, talk about emancipation. We've always had this species barrier where everything stops, once you've sorted out humanity, as it were. Whereas we want to throw these ideas of liberation over the species barrier. And he said it's in that sense that it's more expansive as an idea.
Yeah. How far did we get down?
Yeah, well, feel free to make points about number 2 because I haven't really gone through that greatly. I mainly concentrated on number 1, to be honest.
I'm trying to find the bit that I wanted to read out. So yeah, we would look at the word freedom, I suppose, or liberation more than emancipation, but that was kind of the word that was, I suppose, what they would consider their strongest point, the principle of the emancipation of the animals from exploitation by man. Like emancipation is as far as or as strong as they would consider it. I mean, we don't use that word very often, like now, do we? We only really hear emancipation in legal terms.
Yeah, it was the language of first wave feminism, but it was the language of the anti-slavery movement.
Yes, yeah. You'd only really hear that word these days if you were talking about some sort of court case or whatever. You wouldn't hear that in standard practice. No,
it's kind of like a word that is kind of not out of favour, but just not used anymore, is it? Because he says a movement to emancipate animals may be seen to be following naturally and historically upon the movement to emancipate human slaves. So they make those kind of points over and over again. In fact, Watson said it in 1944 in the very, very first Vegan News, didn't he?
Yes, yeah.
Which is why, and he also talks of one of the great things that Watson said then, I think, which was put in veganism as part of the peace movement, or as the peace movement, was he was saying that he wants everybody to consider incorporating veganism into what he called their peace aims. So obviously they were coming towards the end of the Second World War, and they were starting to think about things like rebuilding. What's going to be our peace aims? And of course, on the global stage, that ended up being like human rights, declarations and stuff, right? I mean, immense things happened after the shock of World War II. And I think that's why a lot of people still regard that as the most kind of important war that happened. Not only because of the horrible stuff that went on, and the Holocaust and concentration camps, and then the nuclear bombs and everything, but it's what happened afterwards. You know, the massive kind of feeling of never again, right? Never again are we going to cause this kind of carnage. And there the vegans are going, yeah, well, let's not forget the other animals.
Yeah, absolutely. But no, I think that's exactly like what you just said is kind of what Watson is referring to when he talks about lesser. That, you know, you've got these other movements, these other causes that are against these forms of injustice or oppression so strongly and vehemently, but yet don't realise the other encompassing things that they still contribute to. So I understand his criticism, but I think it's been kind of used against him a couple of times in the wrong way. I think it's interesting the paragraph that comes after that as well, where he's talking about a point which should perhaps be made clear at once is that the emancipation of the animals does not mean their extinction, which is obviously something that we still deal with.
We get that all the time, yeah.
All the time now, yeah.
Oh, you're in favour of extinction, are you?
Yeah, of course, yeah. That's it then. That's the alternative. It's almost that false dichotomy. You either eat them or they go extinct.
Yeah, well, that was dealt with, wasn't it, by Henry Salt?
Yeah.
Back in 1921, I think. He said that, you know, these poor kind of wandering herds of cows looking for a kind benefactor who will eat them, you know, as though, you know, they're offering themselves up because, oh, we don't want to go extinct, we'd rather be eaten. I mean, it's just a ludicrous position.
The trouble is you get conflicting arguments from people that kind of are resistant to veganism, don't you? You get some that say if we didn't eat other animals, they would take over. They would just multiply and take over.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And then you've got the other ones that say if we didn't eat the other animals, they would die out. Which one of those is right? And in fact, neither of them are right.
Well, it could be a bit of both, I suppose.
Well, the thing is that basically, if we didn't eat other animals, I mean, first of all, with you know, all those animals that are deliberately bred and kept for food would not be bred anymore, right? So obviously there would be fewer of those.
Yeah, but they say that, Ronnie, is a bad thing, not to breed them anymore.
Well, the thing is that the population of animals that humans breed and keep for food is massively excessive. Like if you look at the kind of figures that come from research into the numbers of various animals in the world. If you look at mammals, and these are calculations that have been made by weight, by biomass. You look at mammals, it's 60% of mammals in the world are animals that are farmed by humans. 60%. 36% of mammals in the world are humans because we're mammals, of course, and only 4% are mammals living in the wild, free living mammals. Only 4%. So there's a massive overpopulation of mammals.
And is it possible to translate the biomass, which is like the weight, to numbers then?
Well, it would be difficult. Why they've done it like that, I don't know. But I think they've done it on the presumption that if animals, the smaller the smaller the size of an animal.
So there still could be millions within that 4%.
The greater, the greater their numbers, the greater should be their numbers, because obviously the smaller they are, the less space.
Yeah, so if we talk about mice, there could be millions of mice.
I would argue it's billions,
But you see,
small rodents, that includes lots of animals you wouldn't even think about.
But then that would be right, really, because they're smaller, they use up fewer resources, don't they? And they take up less space. And so it would be normal for the smaller animals to be more numerous, you see. But you've got this massive, sort of disproportion in the the space, I suppose, that various animals take up on Earth, and it's massively taken up by animals that are bred and kept by humans for food, by mammals. If you look at birds, 70% of birds in the world are birds that are farmed. Chickens, turkeys, birds like that are farmed for human consumption.
Yeah, and I suppose from a normal point of view, that's quite shocking, really, because if you think of birds, you're thinking of beings flying around in the sky, don't you?
Yeah, well, most of the birds. Most of the birds on Earth aren't flying around in the sky. They're mostly kept in
that's right. Yeah, that's what I mean. That's why it's so weird.
And so this is this mass overpopulation of animals that are farmed, by humans. Because all of these animals that are on farms, they have relatives, and in most cases, ancestors. That are still living in the wild. You get wild cows. You've got chickens that are kept. You have wild turkeys, don't you? You have chickens originated from guinea fowl.
Guinea fowl, yeah.
And they've been grossed.
Yeah, and we still have red fowl. They're
So all these animals, they wouldn't become extinct because they would still, their relatives and ancestors still exist in the wild. So if you stop breeding ones, because the ones that have been bred and kept for food by humans are kind of massively deformed in terms of their ancestors, because they've been selectively bred to put on weight really quickly. So for instance, you've got these chickens that are bred and kept for food, mostly in broiler units. They become massively overweight. They become so overweight that they can't stand up, because they've been selectively bred to put on weight really quickly, and they end up being slaughtered at about 6 weeks of age, when they could live for I think 8 years, maybe 10 years, something like that would be the natural lifespan of a chicken. And yet these animals are killed at 6 weeks, and they're selectively bred to put on weight so that they're a huge weight by that age. And they can't even stand up. And then you've got cows selectively bred to produce milk, so they kind of end up with having huge udders full of milk, because
but this is where the world has kind of moved on from the early vegans' understanding, because in this essay he goes, the full indictment against exploitation, the traffic in flesh, which is the first thing he says, which is an interesting way of putting it. Most people would say meat, wouldn't they? The traffic in flesh, hunting, trapping, vivisection, and so on, need not be stated here. What must be faced, however, is the undoubted fact that apart from granting the animals the right and the facilities to go back to nature, now the point is, because we've fecked them about so much now, a lot of them can't go back to nature, can they?
No, they wouldn't be able to revert back to nature. But you see, their ancestors or relatives still exist in the wild. They haven't been in most cases they've not been entirely wiped out. And you see, the thing is, if we didn't have animal farming, then because we would need so much less land to produce our food. I mean, for instance, in the UK, if everyone in the UK ate a vegan-friendly diet, we could feed the whole of the UK on a third of the agricultural land that we currently use. All right, so there would be so much land that could be allowed to go back. The free living ancestors, the free living relatives of all these animals that are currently, kept for food, would flourish and they'd prosper, and their numbers would increase, wouldn't they? So you'd have an increase. You'd have an increase in the animals that are the kind of natural form, you could, so to speak, of farmed animals. You'd have an increase in their numbers, because you'd have a reduction in the numbers of those other animals that we've artificially bred from those original free living animals, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
So by no means would they die out. they would continue to exist and thrive and multiply in the form in which they should really be, without humans having interfered with them, with their breeding.
But if you go back to the free living versions, are they still exploited by humans? Those ones?
Well, I think some. I think some are hunted. I mean, you'd get, like for instance, you've got wild boar. I mean, boar, which are the relatives of, which is, that's where pigs came from.
Yeah, well, they're hunted.
They're hunted.
What about
They're
guinea
hunted.
fowl? Are they hunted? I suppose they are, aren't they?
I mean,
In some places, yes.
yeah, possibly they are, and so we'd have to stop that. And in a vegan, in a word where veganism predominated, then that would be put a stop to, wouldn't it? That wouldn't be tolerated.
It's just so typical human attitude, isn't it? That not only are we're gonna take your genetic stock, transform it for our own purposes, but we're still going to exploit you as well.
Mm.
They can't even leave them in peace.
Absolutely, and you'll probably find that all the kind of ancestors of all the animals that are currently,
Well, I was going to say, well, the perfect easy example of that would be like wolves and dogs, right? So, like,
yes,
you can exploit both.
Well, absolutely, because all dogs came from wolves.
And obviously we still trap wolves,
a Chihuahua
or whatever.
or a Yorkshire Terrier,
those in zoos, so we still exploit both.
Yeah. Dogs like a Chihuahua or a Yorkshire Terrier, all these animals, all these dogs, originate from wolves.
Yeah.
Originate from wolves, and this is where wolves were selectively bred by humans, and they were selectively bred, by humans for the purposes of exploiting and killing other animals. For instance, Dachshund means badger hound. They were used to hunt badgers, Dachshunds.
Yeah.
And terriers, and you've got they're either bred for hunting or for herding.
Yeah, I mean, a badger would make mincemeat out of
a Dachshund as we know today.
Oh right. Yeah.
But you see, what's happened is because the use of those dogs for hunting badgers, over the years, decades, centuries, died out. They were then once again, they were further then selectively bred to be able to live in people's homes. So you've got you've now got a dog that's like really docile and wouldn't last 2 seconds against a badger. But the sort of original Dachshunds.
I mean, even the hunting dogs don't do that well against badgers, do they?
No. A badger, badgers are very good for standing up for themselves. I mean, they do use, they do use terriers against badgers, and those terriers are much.
But they often use a team of them, don't they?
Yeah,
because because badgers are so good at fighting.
Yeah,
they have to have a team, and then so they have to rest some of them for a bit.
And terriers often suffer horrific injury.
A badger kill in terms of digging out and that could be like 7, 8, 9 hours.
Oh yes, and this is why it's done, because it's regarded as good sport. If it only lasted 2 seconds and the badger was killed, then it wouldn't provide sport for the people that.
That's sadly correct. Yeah,
we did that in Liverpool. I don't know if I ever told you this, but we had the first type of the AV type screen on the thing, but it was an old-fashioned television that was attached to a VCR player, which was attached to a petrol-driven generator, which we had to baffle to try and keep the noise down. And so it was a real weird situation. But what had happened was there was a big trial involving badger bait in I think in the Liverpool area, and one of the barristers prosecuting was also a member of the League Against Cruel Sports, and one of the League Against Cruel Sports people were also involved with Sea Shepherd that we were involved with. So we managed to get a copy of the tape that was used in the court, which was about 7 hours long, and we used to show that on the street.
That would have been horrific.
Yeah,
I know that it was really weird because we were showing this incredibly horrendous footage, right? And we used to get a big arc of people just gawping at this screen, and then we would give them little pieces of paper telling them what they were watching.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's only a story, but I've always found it kind of fascinating when you think about Fantastic Mr. Fox, the book. and like the lengths that those three farmers go to, it's kind of like epitomizes what still happens today. It is the thrill of the kill. It's not anything else. They enjoy the challenge.
Yeah, I went to a court case where some badger baiters were being prosecuted. It was in Lincolnshire. I mean, this is way back. This would be way back in the kind of early 1990s, and they were actually eating the badgers. They found parts of badgers in at least in a fridge, or at least one fridge belonging to these badger baiters, and they'd actually been eating.
Well, wouldn't they be classified as a form of game, badgers?
I really don't know. I've never ever heard before or since of anyone eating a badger, but these guys were.
Yeah.
And then what happened was that, I mean, their dogs, as they were found guilty, but they didn't get sent to prison. I think they were given suspended sentences. And what happened was when they were arrested, their dogs were confiscated, and their dogs were placed in like a kind of animal shelter. To be kept at the animal shelter while this trial went on, and a lot of these dogs had suffered, had been quite badly injured, had scars and various injuries from being used in badger baiting. And what happened is, normally in these cases, the prosecution applies that they not be allowed to have the dogs back, and it was expected that would happen, and that is what happened. The prosecution applied for that, but the magistrate actually refused the request and said no, they can have the dogs back. But what happened was that the some people from the Animal Liberation Front actually broke into these holding kennels and took the dogs away before the badger baiters could come and get them. So when they turned up at these kennels to get their dogs, the dogs weren't there, and they were, I would presume they would have been found good homes. So that was a good thing for those dogs, because the life of the dogs that they use is horrendous.
Yeah, I've rehabilitated a dog that was hurt tragically in a badger baiting thing where they'd lost pretty much about 70% of their lower jaw.
Yeah.
And I was feeding them with a syringe for about 3 months. Yeah.
Yeah, the injuries can be terrible, can't they?
Absolutely.
Yes, yeah. Friends of mine had a dog that had been used in badger baiting, and the dog had no nose.
Yeah.
Nose, and I mean obviously the nose is really important for a dog.
But and obviously, if you think about it, they obviously go in head first, and so
yeah. I mean, this dog was looked after and still ate and everything. But
yeah, I mean, this guy made I don't want to say full recovery, because obviously that wasn't possible, but they made a great recovery considering he got back to eating solid food.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm just having a look at the chat. We've got a lot to go through here, I think. Have you been? I know you've been in the chat, Andy. So have you been keeping up with?
Only in about the last 5 minutes or so. Before that, I was kind of like focused on my screen as we were reading through the essay. So I don't know if I missed any questions from like the first 40 minutes.
No,
we are almost at question time, aren't we now?
Yeah, question time now. But yeah. So somebody is saying plants feel pain, but the same person called Carl was saying that vegans kill more than flesh consumers.
Well, yeah. There's two things to be said about this. First of all, there is really no evidence that plants feel pain. That they haven't got the the facilities within them. The nerves and all those things by which kind of we humans feel pain. Now, other animals have those things within their body. The ability to sense pain. Plants don't have those within them. But even if plants did feel pain, and even if you care about that and care about the fact that you believe that plants feel pain, even if plants feel pain, then then that actually is another argument for becoming vegan, because if you wanted to minimize the number of plants that are killed, right, in order to feed you. The answer is to go vegan, and the reason for that is because of the huge number of plants that are grown to feed farmed animals. So people that actually consume animal products are responsible for the killing of far more plants than vegans are, because of all the plants.
Absolutely. And on top of that, people always forget about the fact that, trees, bushes, shrubs, these are all plants too. And so not just the plants that are being grown to feed these animals, but also the plants that are being cleared to grow.
Yeah, that's right. And the other, I mean, this is similar to the other argument is, there's animals killed during harvesting of crops, for instance. And once again, non-vegans are responsible for far more of those deaths than vegans for exactly the same reason, because non-vegans are responsible for more harvesting of crops than vegans are, because of all the crops that are harvested. I mean, for instance, we often hear about, like, for instance, soya. You had soya production, an example of one crop, right? And that vegans are accused of, like, all this soya is going to feed vegans and all that, and the rainforest has been destroyed to grow soya. But in fact, 80% of soya is used to feed farmed animals. Mm-hmm. So if you care about the rainforest being destroyed to grow soya, and if you care about the animals that might be killed during the harvesting of soya, then the first thing you have to do is adopt a vegan friendly diet, because that's how you minimise that.
Yeah, and just to absolutely slam dunk that point, if it needed any further doing so, I mean, in a quote unquote vegan world, we could rewild so much of the current planet that's used for these things that would be a massive benefit to plants and.
Oh, absolutely, yes. This is the thing, because so much less land is needed for if we because a massive amount of land is taken up by grazing. If you're talking about land use, it's grazing.
Actual physical space. Yeah, sorry guys, I had to step away, so I don't know whether I missed anything. But I do want to go back to what Carl said. Now, he subsequently said vegans should shut up and work about themselves. Now, I partly kind of agree with that, and we've talked about that in the past, Andy, about the fact that there's going to be a time when we're going to have to step up as a movement and start talking about things like vertical farming and actually bring it about. But what I really dislike is when Carl says vegans kill more than flesh eaters. Now, all the vegans I've known over 45 years, they don't even kill flies. So vegans don't kill. Mm-hmm. What you really mean is that vegans are involved in food production systems that kill. But it's not as though we're quite happy with that. And then to move on to Randy's point, vegans are hypocrites. We don't hear any of you complaining about the millions of other animals killed in food production, I think he's saying. Well, that's not true, right? We're always complaining about that.
Yeah, I mean, I've already covered that and said that it's people that consume animal products that are responsible for far more of that than vegans.
But the point, Ronnie, is that we don't care about the ones that we kill.
Yes, but yeah, the thing is we do care, but the thing is that we don't have control over it.
Yeah.
And this is the problem. If we had control over harvesting, if we had control over the growing of crops, if that wasn't in the hands of non-vegans,
and I think their argument there is, well, get control over it, right? Isn't it?
Well, the way we get control over that is by educating more people to become vegan. Because the more people that become vegan, that obviously changes the culture of society, and it also changes the politics. So if we're in a position where we run the show, then we would make sure that we would put everything in place we could to prevent that from happening. Yeah,
and I mean, one thing that potentially Roger just mentioned that is a possible solution, albeit a little bit expensive at the moment, would be something like vertical farming or fermentation, which could reduce these current crop deaths to more or less nil.
Well, you see, I mean, bacterial fermentation is this kind of method of producing protein and fats, and it's done through and as I say, bacterial fermentation. And bacteria aren't animals; they're bacteria, so that's not an animal product. And that means that not only would that replace animal farming, it would also replace, like, the growing of soya, for instance, because that's primarily a protein crop, it also produce. We wouldn't then have to use palm oil.
Yeah.
We
Yeah,
wouldn't
this
have
is
to
what I'm
use
saying. So we're
rapeseed
not
oil.
just talking
So,
about going vegan would
um,
reduce these things in terms of your
and the
consumption,
amount of
but we're the only movement that want to solve
yeah,
them.
and it's been estimated that where I mean it does need energy, it does need electricity, but that could be supplied by renewables, solar panels or wind power. So once again, that would have low impact on the planet, and basically it's been estimated that bacterial fermentation produce all the protein we need in the world, and all the oils or fats we need in the world.
But, we need to stop pretending that flesh consumers care about mice killed in the
Yeah,
field.
exactly. They don't care about the cows. They certainly don't care about the insects. It's just projection. But it's frustrating that the idea is that.
I mean, they've just got a club that they think they can beat us with. Really.
Yeah, when it is frustrating that actually it's not just the fact that we genuinely do care, but we already have like workable solutions that we talk about.
It's just putting those in.
Yeah, exactly. We don't have the influence. We don't have the power.
The environment. Yeah, it's creating the environment where those solutions could be put into place. And I was saying about bacterial fermentation, you could produce protein and fats, oils for the whole world.
Yeah, and Monbiot is promoting that, isn't it?
George Monbiot.
Yeah, but the thing is, of all the people in the world, who is going to be most kind of going, oh, that's interesting? It's going to be the vegans, right?
Of course, that's what I'm saying. We're the only ones that actually even care about this.
Yes, of course, and so that would massively reduce, not just we would be getting protein from from this bacterial fermentation process, which can produce whatever type of food you want, really. From that instead of animals, but also instead of actually growing protein crops, and the oils instead of instead of getting it from animals, but instead of growing crops that are primarily grown to produce oil, as I said, like palm and rapeseed and all those things. So the amount of land, you only need an area the size of London to feed the whole world. And of course, you're not going to all have it concentrated in the area the size of London. Like each town, city, perhaps even a village, could have one of these units that produces the food.
Yeah.
And so this would be all over the world, and preferably community run and community owned, right?
Yeah, well, going back to the founders of the vegan movement, they were always talking about how Britain could be self-sufficient.
Yeah,
we could easily self-sufficient in food. With as I said, we'd only need a third of the land we currently use for agriculture. And so that's 2/3 of land could be used for other purposes, and it mainly could be allowed to go back, to the wild.
Yeah, here's another example. This really gets me. This pig farms are not killing nearly as many animals as vegan farms. What the hell is a vegan farm?
I know a couple of vegan farmers now, and they all grow crops, and quite a few of them are growing crops in methods that have eliminated or minimised the crop deaths to as limited as they possibly can. And we're not talking about
that can't be true. That can't be true, Andy. That can't be true. That can't be true, Andy, because they're saying we don't care about it.
They definitely
the thing
do
is,
care.
there's a couple of examples for people to look up. This thing about bacterial fermentation. What you need to look up is you go into. I'll just have a look now on my phone. It's something called Reboot Food. Is the I'm just going to look to find the website address.
Yeah, and just whilst you're doing that, I mean, to go back as well, like even when we look at some of the people that are spending the most money on vertical farming technology, something like James Dyson, for example, he's not doing it from a vegan or ethical point of view. He's doing it from a profit point of view. Yeah, so again, the only people that are looking at these as solutions to crop death problems are us.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's not going to be a business for us. It's going to be
exactly that. Yeah, we're not looking to capitalize on vertical farming. We're looking at it as a solution to the problem that you keep projecting onto us.
Yeah, that's right. And so it's kind of, I mean, it's inevitable, I suppose, because there's no fairness in these debates. But the point is, it's really, really unfair for the non-vegans to keep saying this about vegans, because we're the ones who care, and we want more than anybody else in the entire world to have a solution to this stuff.
Well, yeah, and I mean, hypothetically, let's say we could make some sort of deal with the devil tomorrow where we eliminated crop deaths and changed the way farming is. Every vegan would make that deal, whereas every non-vegan wouldn't, because it would mean they'd have to change.
Well, we're prevented from solving it by non-vegans.
Exactly, yeah. They're standing directly in the way and accusing us.
Exactly, standing in the way. Because if we were to have a vegan-run society, we would put in place these solutions. That website is a reboot food. That's all one word. .org. That's first. And the other another good website to look at, another good organisation to look up on the internet is the Vegan Organic Network. Vegan Organic Network, and they promote farming, veganic farming, which is organic and veganic. In other words, they use compost instead of animal manure. They don't use pesticides, for instance.
I've gone to this reboot one, Ronnie. Is this Monbiot's site or not?
Yeah, Monbiot is very, very involved in that. Yeah, George Monbiot is very involved.
Yeah.
But and there's a farm, I think it may be in Oxfordshire, called Tolhurst Farm, which is a shining example of that type of farming, where this guy's he started off with very, very poor land, and he's got a thriving farm producing all sorts of crops and vegetables.
What was that second website you talked about, Ronnie?
The second, it's the vegan. The Vegan
Organic Network.
Vegan Organic Network. And that they promote what they call veganic farming, which is vegan organic. In other words,
you might be able to answer this one, Ronnie, because I don't know this answer, but I know that George Monbiot has had a really kind of weird up and down relationship with veganism. He kind of adopted a plant-based diet, and then we ejected it, and then he's adopted it again. So I don't know whether he's ever gone vegan. Well, I think he kind of moves in and out of a plant-based diet, doesn't
he? I mean, he's very much for ending animal agriculture, but it's from an environmental point of view.
It's not just intensive farming he's talking about. All of it.
Because you see, obviously, the problem with intensive farming, obviously, the animals are kept in horrific conditions, and there's a lot of there's a lot of pollution comes from intensive farming. I mean, for instance, the River Wye here in the UK, it's not too far away from where I am, it's kind of been destroyed really from the runoff from chicken farms. There's been a load of intensive chicken farms kind of along the banks of the River Wye, and the runoff from those chicken farms has killed the majority of fishes and other life in the river. It's horrendous. And the major cause, there was a government's actual government report, just a few years ago, that came to the conclusion that the number one cause of river pollution in the UK was animal farming. Yeah. There's been a lot.
It's been like that for years, hasn't it?
Yeah. Yes, and there's a lot talked about. There's a big thing at the moment about the water companies, polluting the rivers with human sewage by allowing human sewage into the rivers. And that's a huge scandal. But in fact, that isn't the main cause of pollution. The main cause of pollution is animal farming.
Yeah. That reminds me as well, just very quickly, whilst we were talking about earlier, I meant to mention, because we obviously always get accused of all these animals going extinct if we no longer farmed or ate them. But actually, the number one cause currently of species extinction is animal farming. So, the irony is deep.
Absolutely. If someone cares about animals living in the wild, right, and wants to preserve them and protect them, the number one thing to do is to adopt vegan friendly diets and stop consuming animal products. That's the number one, because animal farming is the number one cause of extinctions. And secondly, and also if you look at something we've kind of, animals we mustn't ignore are fishes, and of course fishes are farmed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Huge numbers now, and basically factory farms for fishes, and that causes huge problems, because loads of other fishes have to be caught to feed those fishes.
Yep.
You see what I mean?
Yeah, but
So-
also wild caught fishes are also used in cattle feed and stuff, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
Brine
oh
shrimp,
yes,
for
is they
example.
not just used to feed to feed?
I mean,
humans?
Paul
In fact-
Watson says that cows are amongst the biggest predators of the sea now.
Oh,
which
oh,
is
absolutely.
Such
yes.
a bizarre thing that, I mean, cows
So-
would never go near the
Yeah,
sea.
that's right. And of course we're depleting, we're depleting the oceans of life through, through the fishing industry. And another important point is, there's all this stuff about plastic. Don't use a plastic straw, and there's big campaigns, that I totally support against single-use plastic, for instance, because of the sea is becoming polluted with plastic because most of it will end up in the sea, goes in, very often ends up in the rivers and it's washed into the sea, and there's like loads of plastic in the sea. But 50% of plastic in the sea comes from the fishing industry. It's discarded nets and other tackle from the fishing industry.
I think they ought to ban single-use condoms, don't you?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, yeah.
I know, yeah.
Yeah. Well, you could turn them. You could kind of turn them inside out and use them again. Like
Yeah, put them in the washing machine.
use both sides. Like
I'm sure there's a skit in a bottom episode that talks
Yeah.
about that.
But-
If we haven't had any other like genuine questions, there was a quest for a story. If you want to end the night with one,
Well, I've still got something to say about what Cross wrote, but yeah,
okay.
go on.
No, go for it. Go for it.
Okay, well, it's really interesting because at the end of In Search of Veganism 2, right, Cross has got some footnotes or endnotes.
Yeah.
And it's quite weird because the first one is marked 0, which is really odd because you'd normally say 1, right? So you've got 0, 1, and 2 instead of 1, 2, and 3. The number 1 is where he's doing his definitions of the things that he's been talking about. And he says, emancipation, the state of being set free. So that's quite an interesting one. And of course, you can see clearly there where it's linked to slavery, right? And then you've got exploitation, the act of using for selfish purposes. So for the early vegans, exploitation and use was the problem. And so that, I mean, I know people don't like exploitation as a word much anymore, but what they were basically saying is if you're anti-exploitation, you're anti-use. That's what they're saying. And then the third part of it, which is really interesting, I think, is it says animals, sentient animate creatures other than man, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's really interesting in the sense that some people have claimed that when you look at the Watson thing from 45, which is that we're against the exploitation of sentient life, that he was talking about other animals, whereas they're separating it here. So when they say animal, they mean other animals. When they call sentient life, they're talking about creatures other than man. And so I think it's quite interesting the fact that they had already kind of taken that into account. That they were really talking on a kind of pretty wide scale about what sentient life meant, which was everyone really.
Yeah.
Yes, but I think those people that think that veganism is I mean, there's one thing veganism definitely isn't, and that's diets. There's overwhelming evidence that veganism is a philosophy, and at the very, very least, a philosophy that opposes the exploitation by humans and other animals. Right now, there's a lot of evidence that it's more than that. But if someone just believes it's that, if say they just believed, for me, veganism is, just against the exploitation of other animals by humans, then if someone holds that belief, right, then I would ask them, well, how is that belief sort of consistent with, if to be consistent, if you hold that belief, you have to be also opposed to the exploitation of humans by humans, right? And the other thing is that you see exploitation of other animals isn't the only way that humans harm other animals, because there are ways in which humans harm other animals that don't amount to exploitation, aren't there? if
Yeah,
you've seen
absolutely.
it. Like, for instance, if someone, destroys a woodland because they want to build a golf course, say, for instance, and then all the animals in that woodland are killed, they're not exploiting those animals. They're just they're just killing them for.
Well, they're exploiting the woodland, aren't they?
They're exploiting the woodland, but they're not exploiting the actual animals.
Well, they're exploiting the
are-
woodland with no regard to the moral consequences.
But that's that. But I would call that oppression rather than exploitation. But you see, once again, if you're opposed to the exploitation of other animals, then it's not consistent. It's inconsistent to be not opposed to the oppression. If you see what I mean, to be consistent, you've also got to be opposed to other animals being oppressed. So as soon as you define yourself as being opposed to the exploitation of other animals,
I think it's just a product of their time issue here, Ronnie, in the sense that, probably, I mean, who talked about oppression back in the 1940s?
I'm not sure that they did. I don't
know
know
that, but that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, they wouldn't. Certainly not in any of the early stuff. You don't see that word.
No. But you see, it's important because a lot of the ways in which humans harm other animals, and particularly with our adverse impact on the.
Would they even say that the Nazis oppressed the Jews? I mean, did they use that kind of language, or was it something else?
Well, there'd be a lot of other words for what the Nazis did, like extermination.
Quite. And so that's what I'm saying. So the word that you favour now wasn't even in currency back then.
No.
So we can't kind of blame them for not using it.
No, maybe not. No, I'm not really blaming them. I'm just saying that where you get. I mean, we do have a problem of like reducitarianism within the vegan community, where they're trying to, reduce veganism down to a smaller thing as they possibly can, for whatever reason. And I'm just saying that
a lot of small people who can't cope with the big idea, I think.
Yeah, well, it's what veganism kind of covers is much more expansive than that, because once you accept that idea that it's wrong for humans to exploit other animals, and to be consistent, you've got to accept other things as well. To be consistent with believing. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense really. Even if someone thinks veganism is only that, to make sense, to be consistent with veganism, then they have to kind of have to accept other things, where we'll be opposed to to other things.
Somebody's commented lots of Jewish folk went vegan / vegetarian after World War II, which is interesting. I mean, there was I do remember remember the Jewish Society, Vegetarian Society, I think it was.
Oh yes, it was they were very prominent.
Yeah,
I don't know about now, but they were very, very prominent when I first became vegan. The Jewish Vegetarian Society, way back, I mean, talking about like the early 1970s. Yeah, they were very prominent, and produced and I think they're quite, there were quite a few of their members that were actually vegan. And they used to be produced, but I don't know whether they're still around or what now.
So, Andy, before we run out of time, you wanted to raise something?
No, there was just that someone asked if you two had a story. So obviously, if there's something that will fill in the last 7 minutes.
Oh, a story. Well, one thing which is interesting, going to the reboot, I've been looking at the reboot food thing, just glancing at it. And they got a Q&A, which is quite interesting. The first one, are you planning to campaign to ban animal agriculture? And I was thinking that they were going to answer this question in the way that I would, which is, no, not really, because they say no, right? And the problem with banning stuff is that you ban people from doing stuff that they still want to do. Mm-hmm. And we've seen that as a problem with the hunting ban, for example, right?
Yeah.
You haven't won any moral arguments. You've just, stopped them doing what they still want to do, right? But they don't say that. They actually say, what we need to do is develop the alternatives, and particularly in relation to cost, ease of access, and social acceptability and taste, which is kind of getting that way. But I mean, basically, the best way to stop something is to persuade people not to want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah, yes, absolutely. I mean, the thing is that you're not going to be able to you're not going to ban it anyway, unless you've got a support of a very, very large number of the general public, are you? So
no, it's always fascinated me over many, many, many years that there's so many vegans who kind of ban this, ban that, ban and all that, and you're thinking, well, actually, is that really the way that we're going to do it? I mean, even things like prohibition in USA, it didn't work.
I think it kind of. I think it depends. I think you can look at it on a case by case basis.
Well, which ones work then?
Well, I think the ones where it's a minority pursuit, you've got a better chance of.
Yeah, but we're not dealing with any minority pursuits, are we?
No, we're not. No, but say something like, say something like dog fighting or cockfighting or hunting or these things where they're only it's only.
Yeah, but you still haven't made the dog fighters not want to dogfight, have you?
No, you still not made dog fighters want dogfight, but you've made it.
No, so it's still the same. It's just a smaller scale.
But I think if that wasn't illegal, there'd be more of it going on. I mean, and like we used to have bull baiting and bear baiting, didn't we? Now that doesn't go on anymore. And you used to have public cockfighting and public, so making these things illegal has resulted in, at least a reduction of how much they go on. But I think the difficulty is when you've got something that's like where a very, very large number of people participate in it, talking about banning it at this stage isn't really a realistic thing to do. We have to educate people to not want to do it. Yes, I mean that's where our focus has to be.
Yeah, the mindset has to change before any of that. I mean, even going back to the dog fighting thing, everyone's mindset when it comes to like companion dogs, for example, is massively different now than what it was, say, 100 years ago. Most people now, the majority of people see dogs as companion animals. They don't see them as just simply working animals or whatever. There's a minority that do, but the majority don't. And so when you try and ban things like dog fighting, you've naturally got the majority support because they don't agree with that already. Yeah. Whereas at the moment, what you're facing is the vast majority of us don't agree with us.
Yeah, so you're not going to be. Yeah, and this is where vegan education is absolutely vital.
Mm-hmm.
We have to change the mindset of a considerable number of people. I wouldn't say possibly not even the majority, but a substantial minority, in order to change the.
Certainly enough, and places of influence that can start educating others on a greater mass. Yeah.
Oh yes, I mean I think once you reach a certain percentage, then you have rapid escalation.
Mm-hmm.
Because, well, they call that tipping points, don't they?
Yeah, and for the reason Andy said, I think that then you've got far more people on board who have influence and can.
Yeah, I mean, just hypothetically, imagine that you had people that were like the education minister for the government, for example.
Badger baiting, it's the same with. It should be the same with hunting. It's not done properly now. Hopefully we might get an incoming government that might do something about it, but I'm not going to hold my breath too much.
No, I don't think you should hold your breath about anything about the Labour Party.
No.
Am I still here? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know what happened then. Yeah, I got a notification from TikTok saying that the live had disconnected, but obviously it hadn't.
Yeah, well, just maybe just for you, we've carried on blabbering.
Oh, yeah, as long as you're still here, that's fine.
Well, it'd be interesting to see what the recording does, isn't it?
Yeah,
I think it should still have picked you two up.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to go because I've got a.
No, that's fine.
Yeah, well, we're out of time anyway. So
thank you to everyone.
Okay, people, I'll say good night. And Andy, do you want to say, close it down?
Yeah, we'll do. But yeah, massive thank you to everyone in the comments, and thank you for everyone that's hung out and listened to us. And we'll be back same time next week. Thanks so much. Yep. Good night.
See you then. Take care. Bye.